Hello, everyone, and welcome again. Thank you for joining us. I am absolutely over the moon today. I've got two people who I think have got a perfectly interesting story, and it's right on point, I think, for where we are today as a planet and for lots of the discussions I know that I'm having with businesses and other people are talking about as well. So I'm delighted to introduce Simon and Tracey West, who are both environmentalists and involved and co-founders of Word Forest, which we're going to find out a bit more. So firstly, Simon and Tracey, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for asking.
Thank you, Phil.
It's a joy to be here.
Oh, well, thank you so much. So I guess we start, if you can just give us an overview, because I'm relatively new to, Word Forest. I was delighted to find out more about you. And I watched your video, by the way, yesterday with Kate
Excellent.
Winslet. I'll be sending that out as well. For those of you who haven't seen it, Kate Winslet does a brilliant overview and a narration of a video on YouTube, and I'll put a link to it later on in this. So give us, I suppose, a light overview. Word Forest, when did you start it and why? Let's start with that.
Well, Word Forest is a UK registered charity. And the main thing that we do, we'll talk about other things that we do, but the main thing is plant trees. And that was how we got started. That we got married a second time around us and asked our friends, instead of buying us a set of towels or a kettle, to plant trees for us. And we have a friend who was engaged with farmers in Kenya, planting the trees there. And so we had a wedding forest planted in Kenya.
That was back when we were sort of philanthropically sort of doing a bit of tree planting. We took it on from there as publishers. We were publishers at the time. And we came up with an idea for a literary prize called the Magic Oxygen Literary Prize, which ran for 5 years. And in short, it was short stories and poetry, which we just loved judging. And we had 20 judges dotted all the way around the world that helped us as well. And the USP of this competition was, I'm still so proud of it to this day, we planted a tree for every single entry. So it was only a $5 to enter, but that $5 gave us the ability to get a tree in the ground, give a woman some money for planting it, buy some new seeds as well to make some new saplings.
Yeah.
And there was a little bit of spare cash as well.
So we asked the Kenyan people what they wanted to do with the spare cash, and they said build classrooms. So that was the very, very start of it. We were doing planting trees, which is the forest bit, and building classrooms, which was the word bit. So after about 3 years of doing that, Tracey decided she wanted to set up a charity, and I thought, actually, that's a really good idea.
We needed to formalize everything that we'd done up to that point. And the heartbreaking thing for us was we'd get to the end of the year. Well, the competition always ran to the end of New Year. So for 5 years, Simon was never enjoying New Year's.
My December 31st was on the computer until midnight, and I had to close the competition.
Waiting to
then
stop
I was allowed to separate.
And then, absolutely. But for those 5 years, we would just literally close it. We knew how much money we'd raised. We knew how many more trees we could get in the ground, how many more classrooms we could build. And then we just thought, we've got to wait another whole year, and we had to formalize and get going. And that was back in 2017. So we were founded as a charity in April 2017, and we've been just going like that ever since, haven't we?
Yeah.
Carrying on with the plants, planting the trees, building the schools, which is critical. And we've added 2 extra pillars to it, which are facilitating education, and women's empowerment, which is the key that sort of holds it all together, which I'm sure you'll explore in many other ways.
Absolutely. No, we'll definitely come on to that, because I'm keen to hear more about the pillars, because I've read about them and keen to explore. I guess one of the questions that I first asked you, and you gave me some fascinating insight, is why Kenya? So I guess if I could cover that one really, because you gave me some stats here, which just blew my mind. So
yeah, it is surprising when you find out that the trees in Kenya grow a little bit faster than they do here. In volume, it's actually 10 times as fast as a tree grows here.
That's incredible, isn't it?
It's not just Kenya, it's the whole tropical region. We got Kenya through a process of knowing the right people in the right places. We'd love to expand to other tropical countries, but right now we're focusing just on Kenya. And the speed of growth there is phenomenal. We were in Kenya in December last year, and we were looking at trees that were 10 meters tall, and they were only 3 or 4 years old.
Yeah.
They were enormous and they grow so fast. So if our objective is to extract carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and turn it into wood, which then locks it in so it's there for a long time, then you want to get the trees to grow as fast as possible.
The other thing that brings, of course, is if you expand your mind and think, well, tree, great, brilliant, but actually think about planting food, nut, and fruit and medicine trees. So you're not only doing the lockdown and the drawdown and the lock in, but you're potentially giving hunger and poverty a run for their money too. And you're creating commodities that people can turn into something they can sell. Medicines, for example, the neem tree, just as a small example, the neem tree is a great tree grown in Kenya. Well, if you learn how to extract the neem oil from that tree, now anyone that's got children will know neem oil. They might not realize they know neem oil, but if they've had kids, they'll have had nits. And if they've had nits, they've had that comb being pulled through their hair with that liquid stuff. There's neem oil. Well, neem oil is a magical medicine. It does all sorts of other things as well. But being able to capture that neem oil literally just by tapping the tree, not tapping it, but tapping the tree and taking the oil out, means you've got something to sell. If you've got something to sell and you've had some education on basic literacy and numeracy, which a great many women never had a chance to do as youngsters, if they can do that and count out a money exchange and generate an income, you've really solved the whole thing. Oh, and as a thank you, would you plant some more trees for us, please? No problem. That's easy. You've just made my life so much better because these trees have given me this thing that has then led on to this, and it's just a circle of goodness. In fact, one of our corporate partners says we have created a virtuous circle with the planting trees, building schools, facilitating education, and the women's empowerment. And it's right, because it just keeps going around it keeps giving. Yeah, it just
keeps... say it's a full cycle, and it closes
yeah.
the loop and it continues again, and it's...
Yeah. Just to add one extra thing, just to give you some context. So Simon was saying they grow 10 times faster than they do in the northern latitudes here. A couple of examples. A mango tree at 5 years old is 12 feet tall, and it'll have its first flush of 100 pieces of fruit. And we're talking fruit that's kind of this sort of size, really chunky fruit. And that will go on and give 1,000 pieces of fruit over in that first season. And you just think, that's an incredible amount of food, not just for you and your family, but as I say, to go on and generate an income. Another tree, as another example, is the casuarina gomina or germina, depending on how you want to say it, grows like they're grown quite closely together, and they literally just grow dead straight and tall. They're really skinny trees, they are solid trees, and they're used for things like fencing and building materials. Well, at 5 years old, that'll be 35 feet tall. Yeah. Yeah.
35
so
feet.
on average, the sizes between that and all of the other ones in between, it's just astonishing. The canopy cover that we can create in a handful of years is phenomenal. That then increases, creature habitat, shade for humans, and the list of benefits goes on. And I know you're keen to explore some more, and we are too.
No, absolutely. And it's just amazing when, talking to you guys, when I hear people from startup worlds and whatnot, and, business investment, one thing they often talk about is something easy to do. Is it repeatable, and is it scalable? And you've got all of those things.
Yeah. I think the answer is hell yeah.
Certainly scalable.
Yeah.
There are lots and lots of people in Kenya who all now understand the need to plant trees, because they're at the sharp end of climate change. They're getting desertification creeping in. They suffer from droughts. They suffer from massive floods on occasion. It's neither feast. It's a feast and famine, I think, is the expression, that they either have too much or too little. This doesn't seem to be very often just the right amount. But we're helping in a number of ways with that, not least by providing them with water storage. So that when it does rain, they can capture the water, and then when it's a very dry period, they can use that stored water.
I think when you think about, there's a word that captures it really rather well, scientific description of it, called evapotranspiration. Do you know evapotranspiration?
I can't say I've ever used that word or even heard it.
Okay, it's a great word and it makes total and complete and utter sense. So if my hand is a tree and it's raining on my lovely hand and my leaves are catching all the droplets of the rain, that's terrific. The heat over in Kenya means that in a short time that's going to head back up into the sky. Well, if the clouds sort of shift a little bit further down country and there's another tree, it's going to do the same thing. The rain's going to come down, it's going to get on the leaves, and it's going to go back up, and the cycle goes on. The minute you reach the point where the water just goes straight down to the flat ground and it cannot really evaporate and go back up to the sky, then you've got a situation where the rains can stop. The more trees you have, the more chance you have of evapotranspiration going on well, and the better chance you have of having the short rains and the long rains, the two key major raining periods in Kenya, of being normalized. But it needs more trees. I think you mentioned Kenya's got less than 10% canopy cover. Less than 10%. We've got better canopy cover in the UK, aren't we? About 16%
Yes,
in the UK.
16% here, and it's the Kenyan government were trying to persuade everybody that it was 10-12%, but the statistics that they're now accepting say they have 7% canopy cover. Which it's supposed to be jungle.
Yeah.
You know, it's supposed to have lots and lots and lots of trees, but it's 7% because so many have been cut down.
Yeah, but the exciting thing about that is we've got lots of land to work with.
Yeah.
So in terms of being able to scale up, in terms of being able to keep it really close to the equator, one of our key sites is 3 degrees south of the equator. That's pretty nigh on perfect growing conditions. If the trees can be looked after, well looked after by humans in the first 3 months of being planted, then they'll get their tap roots down and they will be in a really good, they'll stand a really great chance of growing to maturity. They just need that helping hand in the first instance. So that's why we pay people to do it, to do exactly that. And things are going really well. Yeah.
Brilliant. I mean, that's what I want to explore a little bit now, your relationship with the people of Kenya, because, you know, often we can be seen as people coming into another country and trying to dictate, but you guys have seemed to have developed a lovely relationship with the people of Kenya. You mentioned the people, and I saw in the video, the mothers of the forest. I mean, one, it's a lovely, you know, it's a lovely title. So can we just explore that a bit? Who are the mothers of the forest? I mean, it conjures up all sorts of images, but I know you're very close to these people, so very nice to just to hear about them.
Yeah.
Shall I talk about the interviews?
You can do.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that we went over in 2018 for the first time ever visiting Africa at all for me, and for the first time visiting Kenya for both of us.
Saw the wedding forest.
And we saw our wedding forest for the first time, which was enormous. And Tracey conducted a series of interviews with a group of women that were already being the tree planters. They were the ones that did most of the tree planting work. And the interviews were designed to understand what their lives were like. What did they have as things that were better than us? Their sense of community is very, very strong, which is great. And what did they have that were causing them problems? What would enable them to plant more trees on our behalf?
And it was fascinating. I mean, I will never forget doing those interviews with the women. It was just women. There were no men with me when I was having my discussions with them. My words were translated as well into Kiswahili or Giriama, the local language. And basically, the commonalities were that they were very isolated, socially isolated. A great many of the women suffering and struggling with depression. Sadly, far too many of them suffering with domestic violence of some form or other, because the pressures on the household, and we're talking mud hut household, so very meager existence, very simple existence, the pressures were so huge. You know, there just wasn't enough money to go around and to feed everybody. They'd frequently have just one meal a day. Often the girls in the family, if they had boys and girls, it would be just the boys that were allowed to go to school because they didn't have the money to stretch to the girls going as well. And I just felt that if we offered them an opportunity to come together and number one, learn about who your neighbors are. You might have sort of miles in between one mud hut and the next person's home. So give them a chance to come together, give them a chance to just be women for a real short period of time and see if that works well. I say a short period of time, a day. So come together, learn about tree planting, learn about sapling care, learn about best ways to perhaps prune the trees or to look after them in some way, sharing the best knowledge and the best bits that each of the women had with their neighbors, and give them a meal that they haven't had to really struggle to pull together. So a great nutritious meal, fruit as a dessert. So there's always fruit, always fresh and clear water, which of course we take for granted. They will have had to have got up 2 hours before dawn to perhaps go and walk to the river and bring back some water before the day even begins. Fresh water is a really big deal. So having a meal, having something to drink, having some commonality, having some learning and education. Would they be up for that? Basically was the offer. And the answer was absolutely. Please give us that chance. So the Mothers of the Forest was born. It was easy. And at that point we had, I think, 40 mothers in the initial group, who came together twice a month to have this sisterhood opportunity to create a sisterhood and a strength within themselves, and to learn lots of different things, learn how to support each other. They also came up with their own idea of a thing called table banking. So Word Forest paid the mothers to plant the trees, and they came up with this idea of putting a little bit aside, so putting together a little sub aside, if you like, for the treasurer to look after, and that money could be utilized by the mothers if someone wanted to take out a small loan, let's say, to buy some dried fish or some dried foods or whatever, some dried fruit to take to market and to sell. If she didn't have the capital herself, she could take it out of the kitty and pay back a very small amount of interest. Well, this interest isn't coming to us, by the way. At the end of the year, when the mothers have all tallied up their figures, that money is then split amongst all the mothers. So the money is there.
Like a credit union.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And they came up with this idea themselves. And it's just so brilliant. It's enabled them to do so many things they wouldn't have been able to do. And they are just so inspirational. These women have taken the hardships of their lives and they share things amongst each other that they've never had an opportunity to share before. And they are absolutely stronger for it. So they are inspirational women indeed.
It sounds it, and it's amazing. I mean, I love the whole credit union idea because I'm a big fan of that sort of ideology myself. But I don't want to get into controversial territory here, but why have you aimed this program at women? I think for those of us who don't understand the culture of Kenya, I think it's important we cover that, because I think somebody probably watching this will question, well, where are the men in all this?
Absolutely. So, I mean, there is a trope that the men don't do any work and the women do all the work, which is not strictly true. The men do work, but they do different stuff. But the women seem to be the ones that lose out the most when climate change strikes. When there's droughts, it's the women that are responsible for finding the food, and that becomes more difficult.
The water, of course.
When the water disappears, yes, the women are the ones that carry the water almost exclusively. Very small boys will carry small pots of water on their heads. Once they get to be about 8 or 9, that just stops. And then it's the 8 or 9-year-old girls onward. They learn how to carry these tubs of water on their head. A grown woman will carry a 20-litre, that's 20 kilogram tub of water on her head. If you watch the film that you mentioned earlier, if people watch that film, they will actually see women walking along with stuff on their heads. Now, in our community, there is no way you could do that at all. If you did do it, then you would end up with muscle and skeletal problems. Well, guess what? In Kenya, they end up with neck problems, they end up with back problems because of carrying this water. So the women do suffer a great deal from the things that we can improve. We can help them improve themselves. So that's why we focus on the women from that point of view. From the educational point of view, if a family has a little bit of money and can afford to send 1 or 2 children to school out of their 4 or 5, then they'll send the boys first.
That said, so obviously the focus is to support the women. If you can support the women, then you support the whole community, because they are the backbone. It is a very patriarchal society over in Kenya as well. But I would say that the modern Kenyan men, there is a real sea change, isn't there? The modern
absolutely.
Kenyan men's thinking is to support the women, because by supporting the women, that then extends to supporting the whole family, and everybody benefits. So, but we're still kind of juggling with some of the older ideas that women need to do everything. But when we have an educational program, it does also extend to men. For example, the charcoal burners rehabilitation program.
Yes, absolutely. Charcoal burning is done by all sorts of people. They cut down a tree, make charcoal, and then either go and sell it or use it to cook on. We, as tree planting fans, obviously don't approve of that. We think it's not the best way to do things. So we ask them not to do it, but we have to offer ways to do things instead. You know, you can't just say stop doing that if that's the way they're earning their money. So we come up with money earning initiatives, and we encourage them to come up with their own. You know, we know some basic things that they can do, but we want them to be inventive. We want to, I struggle to use the words give them permission, because they don't need permission from us, but we tell them that, you know, you can think of things, you can come up with business ideas. If they're good, they'll work.
What Simon means by the give them permission is, you're absolutely right. And an example of that is when we did a mat making, we run mat making workshops. So I'm saying mats, so sort of table mats or bath mats, things that you could sell to hotels and so on. And we had all these beautiful different coloured wools and fabrics. And we had a brilliant teacher that was teaching the mothers how to make these mats. And she said, right, okay, here's our piece of fabric. Knock yourselves out, make your own designs. And they said, what do you mean make our own designs? And she said, well, blend this colour with that colour, make a square here and a circle there, or a diamond here. You do what you want to do. And they said, we are never in a position where we have the freedom of choice to come up with a creative idea.
Wow.
Never. And so I just, that's an example of what Simon's saying. They feel they don't have permission to be creative, to come up with ideas. And it's our job, I suppose, really, to be the conduit that enables them to unlock that within themselves. If they have that unlocked, they're off. You know, you should have seen those mats as well, Phil. I tell you, they were fabulous.
Yeah.
And the more they made, the more they blended their colours and their shapes, and they were allowed. They'd given themselves permission to do it. Yeah. And that was a seriously good day.
There is another way that we're involving the men. On the last visit that we went over in December 2022, we established a new initiative called Trainers for Trees, which basically gets the young men and young women in football teams over there planting trees, and for every tree they plant they get a bit of money, and if they plant, I think it was 20 trees we ended up with, they get enough to buy a pair of trainers. And to make sure that the money does actually go into trainers, we get the local representatives to bulk buy them. They do it through the teams, so they'll go and buy 20 pairs of trainers and socks and other bits and pieces kit for the football teams. But that gets the men engaged as well, the young men,
and the young boys,
who, to be honest, they weren't that interested in growing trees, because, you know, they do their thing, and growing trees wasn't it. Whereas the young women had already got into this idea that tree planting is a really good thing.
Which goes back to that critical bit about the education, you know. The boys weren't only doing tree planting and getting their trainers, they had lessons. They had an understanding of why that ground that they're on is so dry, why these cacti are growing everywhere. Well, of course, as Simon said earlier, there's desertification coming in, and the winds are blowing in strange things that really aren't meant to be there in Kenya. And it's about learning. You know, we're never too old to learn. And if you give them an opportunity to learn something other than the standard curriculum, then they take it on board. So the word is spreading, and they're becoming the advocates. They're becoming advocates for the trees, which is just terrific.
Brilliant. And in terms of your organization, the 4 pillars, so just so people can understand it, I know it's quite in depth, but if we can give them a quick overview of what are the 4 pillars and 4 principles of Word Forest.
Yeah, so as I said in the introduction, it started off with the 2 pillars of words and forests. So building classrooms, which is absolutely vital. Again, if you watch the film, you'll see a mud hut classroom.
Yeah, I was going to say, talk about the typical classroom.
With the children sitting on bits of wood, balanced on stones, no desks, and the mud hut classrooms have holes in the walls. So we commissioned the building of decent classrooms with proper desks and proper chairs, and
stone built.
These days we put a library area at the back, a lockable cupboard to use as a library, so that they've got somewhere to store books. And these make a massive difference to their education. So that's the second bit. So growing trees, very obvious. Building classrooms. The women's empowerment we've already talked about.
Yeah, I was going to say as well, and the classrooms are not just used for the children in school and term time. Beyond those times, it can be used by the community. So you can have adult groups of learners going in there to utilize these. There's a standard footprint for a classroom. It's 16 meters by 8 meters.
Yeah.
Solid stone brick, solid stone walls, and beautifully done, really lovely. And the key thing is the difference in the temperature. When you walk into a mud hut classroom, not only does it feel quite dark and oppressive, it's not painted, it's just mud, like cob, if you like, on the walls, which then crumbles away. It's massively hot, really dusty. It's easy to get creatures and snakes and scorpions all creeping in there while you're trying to do your work. And that's quite distracting. It's very distracting. But in a classroom, you've got less chance of that occurring. We have grill on the windows so that monkeys and baboons can't get in and trash the resources, the learning resources. And you just can't do that on a mud hut classroom. So adults can use that space as well to learn, and they do. And it's just a terrific community asset. So yeah, the classrooms are great all round, really. But then that adult education, as Simon said, leading on from the child guard burners rehabilitation classes. I mean, we've done all sorts of things. We've run all sorts of learning workshops there until we started building our own head office and our permaculture teaching centre, which is perhaps something we'll get onto later. But using those classrooms has been really handy for us. But the other ones
The education does also include some very, very practical skills. We funded a brick making machine, and then the women learnt how to make bricks.
They certainly did.
And you think, wow, that's quite a useful skill. They're not made in the fired clay method that we have over here, but they're made out of soil, sand, and a very small amount of cement. And they use pressure, very high pressure, to create the bricks. So that's usually a very long pole with 1 or 2 women pulling down on it to squash the brick into shape. They then have to be treated over a period of a week or 2
with a little
sprinkling of water so that the cement sets.
Yeah, and they're interlocking bricks, so you can create all sorts of shapes of sizes of walls and do whatever you want to do. And again, we've created another commodity that people can sell. So you've created an income generation machine. It's wonderful. It works brilliantly well. But that comes down to the facilitating education, doesn't it, really? Yeah. Facilitating education on all sorts of things. ABC 1, 2, 3 was really massive, I think, when we realized that any form of learning we were gonna kick off there we needed to draw back to the real basics. We sent a couple of team on a permaculture a permaculture design course, a PDC. And when they came back to the community to then impart that knowledge, I think the very first workshop we had, where there were 40 mothers of the forest, plus about 10 members of the community. 50 people were learning from 2 people that had gone on a course. And what we realized at that point was the spoken learning and the demonstrating things, when you can show someone how to do something, that's great, and they'll learn something. But they needed more. They needed basic literacy and basic numeracy. So then we realized at that point, well, let's just give them the opportunity. We asked the mothers, would they like the opportunity to come a bit earlier on their 2 monthly meetings to do ABC 1, 2, 3, and you figured we'd get about a 15%, 20%.
I guess that I thought maybe we'd get half of them at a push. When we asked the question and it was translated, every single hand went up. Yes, I want to do this. They have a massive thirst for that kind of education. I mean, the brickmaking, for example, if you've got exactly the right quantity of materials, then you can make the bricks. If you've got maybe only half a bag of cement, you need numeracy skills in order to work out, well, how much soil do I need and how much sand do I need? You need those basic tools that we were all offered as children in our schools. Kenyan children are mostly offered these days, but there's an awfully large number of Kenyan women and men who didn't get that opportunity.
Yeah.
So we're now catching up with that by offering them education in later life.
And of course, once you've got that, you know, the whole world is your oyster, frankly, which is a very bad analogy for a vegan, but literally it is there. You know, you can do so much when you've got those critical skills. And the most important one, I think, as well, is counting out a money exchange, so that you're not, you know, you're not stiffed if someone's buying your mangoes and you just don't know what you're doing with the money. It's just not adding up and making sense. So that is an absolute game changer. It really is. And those literacy and numeracy lessons still are highly sought by new mothers of the forest groups. So we're excited to be able to unlock that.
No, that's excellent. I think that's a great place to stop episode 1. You've touched a little bit, the teaser there on the permaculture, which we'll cover in episode 2.
Yeah, brilliant.
That was new to me. I'd never heard it before. But just for now, I mean, for anyone who wants to seek you out, obviously it's wordforest.org. Just had to check my screen to make sure I didn't get it wrong. So people can seek you out, and we'll cover obviously in episode 2 how also people can get involved. But for now, for episode 1, thank you so much to both of you. It's an absolute delight to meet you. I look forward to picking up in episode 2, and we'll be scheduling these, and hopefully we'll get everyone involved.
That sounds absolutely marvelous. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to talk about Word Forest. We are a small charity, but I tell you what, mate, we are perfectly well formed, and we are nailing what's needing to be done to alleviate the climate emergency. We are nailing that to the wall. We really are. So every additional firm or individual that comes on board to say, you know, let's do our carbon offsets with these people, they've really got it going on. We have. And as you kindly mentioned, our film #TreesAreTheKey, which is free to watch on YouTube. Watch that and you'll see the Mothers of the Forest's first ever literacy and numeracy lesson, which I cannot watch without crying, because I was stood there watching from the side of the camera, and it was just so uplifting, and I will never forget the excitement that was in the room. And you actually see their very first lesson in that documentary, so narrated by Kate Winslet, no less. So I hope people will watch it.
Well, thank you so much, and we look forward to catching you in episode 2.
See you in episode 2.
Bye.